Hello, this is Carl Irwin with another Blender tutorial. We're going to look at a couple of different concepts here today. One of them is going to involve a couple of assets. I've been doing a series on simple asset creation. And we're going to look at a couple of assets that can be used to generate color grading and a kind of a final finish on your projects. So one of them is going to deal with an asset for film grain or noise, and then also an asset with respect to a very basic general lens vignette. So we're going to look at that. I'm also going to show you a trick for sharpening your image. There's actually a couple of ways that you can sharpen an image, one through Blender and one using GIMP outside of Blender, but using it seamlessly directly from the Blender interface rather than using the compositing tools to generate sharpening. You can do it right in the VSE, Video Sequence Editor, or through GIMP. So we're going to look at that as well. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to bring in some footage. I have a final grading scene opened here. This is in the Video Sequence Editor. I'm going to add a piece of footage that I've already created. This is a movie. I have it here on the desktop, and it is a flat composite of some objects, and it's this airplane moving through space. So it's like a jumbo jet. You can see flying through the air. This is a 3D model. Actually, I have the original scene here. If we go back to the start, and I have it set for a lighting pass. So this is a pass with just the lights. I'm going to turn that off for a second. Actually, what we need to do is we need to enable our lights here. So a bunch of lights in the scene. Turn on the rendering, and then our background image, set it to shadeless, and there's also mist enabled in the scene, so we'll turn that on so we can see it. This is the final, kind of the final render minus a couple of other things in there. There's a lens flare that I had in there. We'll turn that on. So this is, everything is on here, and what I did is I rendered out this animation by a couple of different passes, one with just the plane, and then another pass with just the lighting on the airplane, and then a pass with the lens flares, which are actually 3D images. I've done already a tutorial on creating lens flare effects within a 3D scene. One of them is by using a rig, and I have that rig available on BlendSwap, a couple of those rigs actually, called GL Flares, OpenGL Flares. These are just two-dimensional images from that package, and they are set in three-dimensional space. They're set to X-ray, and then they are set to an add blend mode using the game engine settings. So you can use those assets from that package there if you download it from BlendSwap to generate lens flares, kind of simple and easy directly in the 3D viewport. So I put out a number of these passes. This is a model that I textured, set materials to. It was actually it's a model I found in a number of different sources. Some of those sources, it's kind of a shady business out there, some of these models that you can find. Some of those sources were a zero reference license. Other ones were not like that, but I know that those other ones that were asking for credit, that they got it from a blank that was zero license. So you people out there shouldn't be doing that. You need to follow the rules there. But anyway, this is a blank that I then textured. There are some textures that came with it here for some of the fine detail and the bump mapping. And then I added the paint and the name to it. I also added to this, again, this is all OpenGL, some of the texturing for the silvery parts here. So I generated these materials using OpenGL techniques, and you can see it's quite a nice result that you can come up with here using just OpenGL rendering. So what I did is I rendered this out. I got it a few different passes, and then I composited those together. If we go back to the viewport here, you can see that this is what the final composite looked like with all of those elements together. So it's kind of a flat finish to it. I turned down the saturation to 0.8, and then I also put on a decontrasting color curve in my final output. And the reason is because the lower the contrast and the lower the saturation you have on your image, the easier it is to add an effective deep color grade to it in the end. That's kind of the basic premise behind the CineStyle settings on your DSLR. You can use the CineStyle profile by Technicolor to get a very flat image that has all of the color data in it in a very, very wide spectrum, so that you can do very deep color grading and correction later on. So we're kind of faking that by setting our saturation low and putting on a lower contrast curve to it to get this output. So once I've done that, I also added a poor man's motion blur, so I oversampled this at twice the frame rate, and then I put that together with a couple of overlays. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can check my channel where I talk about the poor man's motion blur when rendering OpenGL. Anyway, this is the final output that I have. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of make this crisp and clear and finish it up. And I'm not going to show you how to make these assets. I'm just going to explain what they are, because you can make these many different ways using any kind of image editor, photo editor, or even using Blender's interface. You can do this using masks or wipe effects or anything like that. So just want to talk about what these assets are and how they can be used. So first thing we have here is we have our footage, and what we want to do is we're going to add first a vignette to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the beginning, and I'll click on add, and we're going to select the image. Now I've made these assets already, and I put them into a folder called Lens Filters. There's two different images that we're going to use. One is an anamorphic widescreen crop, and I believe that the ratio that you end up with on this is 2.35 by 1. That's the actual ratio. And what I did is I just made an alpha transparent image in GIMP that gave me these bars on the top and on the bottom, and the image itself is at 1080p high definition, because that's typically what I output my video at. So I have one of these. I've made them also at 720p. The key, though, is that when you do this, you want your image to be at the exact definition setting, the exact pixel setting of your output, because you don't want this to be up converted or down converted inside of the video sequence editor, or can add some kind of anti-alias pixels on the edges. You want it to be a very crisp, clear, fine edge. So this is one that we're going to use. I also made this image. It's a vignette, and what I did is I made an ellipse inside of GIMP on an image. And again, this does not have to be at your aspect ratio. This can be at the proper definition. It could be at the exact ratio, but not necessarily at the right definition, because we're not worried about up converting and down converting with this. But I made an ellipse, and then I blurred it out so that you have absolute transparency in the middle, and then on the very corner edges you're almost going to total black. So this is a vignette for a very basic anamorphic type lens. This actually is 16:9 ratio rather than the anamorphic. But we're going to take this, set the start frame to 1, and we're going to put it to 250 for the end frame. That's how long the animation is. And we will add the strip. Now you can see that right away we see our vignette here, but we need to set the blend mode to alpha over. So it's very, very dark, very stark, so we're going to set the opacity down to 0.4. Now, you can't really see it very easily right off the bat here, but if I disable it, you'll see the difference. So the very corners are just a little bit darkened out. It's just an overlay effect to very quickly get yourself a vignette. Now, you can do this by creating ellipses or masks, or using, you can even use the wipe effect in here with two colors to generate a mask, but the idea is that we want as little extra processing as possible. So you want to create these assets separately and put them in a folder that you can use very quickly and efficiently with very fast render speed. So here's this vignette. Now the other good thing is that with the vignette, you can put it into really any aspect ratio and it will automatically take on that aspect ratio inside of the video sequence editor unless you enable the offset button down here. So in fact, if I enable the offset, well, it doesn't change because this is actually 1080p. But if this was a lower lower resolution, by hitting the offset button, it would then take on the actual resolution that it is initially set at. So the video sequence editor automatically upconverts everything to fit within the output. That's an automatic feature. So there's the vignette. We'll just leave it in there as it is. The next thing we're going to add is a video. If I click on Add Movie, and I go to that same folder, my lens filters, you see I have a couple of different videos in here. They kind of look the same. These are noise videos. Now let me show you how to make this very quickly. If I create a new scene, we'll go back to the default view scene, and we'll add a camera very quickly, and we'll turn on our, set this to GLSL. I do that by habit. We'll go to the top view, and then we will align our active camera to the view. And we'll move it back on the Z-axis so we can see a little bit more here, just to kind of center things up a little bit. What you can do is you can add a plane. We'll add an image plane. Go down to Mesh, add a plane, scale it up. And we're going to turn off, the mist is already turned on because of the other scenes that we have here. Oh, there we go. I thought I saw it showing up, but maybe not there. On our plane, we're going to add a material. Click on New Material. We're going to make it a shadeless material, and we're going to go to the texture settings. I'm going to add a noise. Let's see if I can find it in here. A noise texture. Now you can't see it right away, but if I go to the render output, now we are in the Blender internal render engine, you'll see this noise. Now if I go to the next frame, you'll see that the noise actually changes frame by frame. Each frame that plays back, this noise texture will update. Now I want to get this to look black and white, kind of like a TV static. So we'll go into the texture settings. We're going to go to the color settings. We're going to add a ramp. And on the black side, it's automatically set to alpha being absolute 0. I'm going to turn that up. So here's what we have in the end. And if I go forward a frame, you'll see that this then updates. Now, what you want to do is take this output and render out about 24 frames, about a second's worth in 24 frames per second time. As many frames as you want without repeating. But I did 24 frames of this at your absolute maximum resolution. So 1920 by 1080, 100%, 24 frames. Then render out this animation. And then what you can do is create a noise effect that you can then use for film grain. Okay, so that's how I did that. Let's go back to our composition here. And what we can do is we can add that video. Come up here to, now I did 2 of these. One version is the method that I just explained to you. Another one is I rendered out a single frame of noise, and then I scaled it up within the scene, and then I set a curve to it for location on the X and Y axis, and I made it jump around the scene all over the place. So each frame it was jumping wildly around, and what that did is it gave me frames that were changing frame by frame by frame. You don't see the motion of the jumping around, you just see the noise changing. Now the reason I tried that is because it's a quicker way to render. You can render 1 frame of noise and then use the GLSL output to create this. So that was just kind of an experiment. This one's a little bit better though, so I'm going to take this one here. Start at frame 1, we'll go to frame 250. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this noise and we're going to duplicate it and slide it over. So every 24 frames it'll just repeat itself till we get to the end. Then I'm going to box select all of them, and we'll go to the strip menu here and we'll click on make meta strip. So now this is one connective piece here together. Just to clean it up, we'll move this into 250 frames. I'm going to set this to cross, and we're going to set the opacity way down to 0.02. Now if we zoom in, especially on a darker or a very light section, you can see here if I disable it, maybe you can't see it on the output, I'm not sure, but if I disable this, you see that the noise disappears, and when I enable it, you can see a little bit of noise. So we're going to simulate film grain, the addition of the film grain, that with each new frame the grain will change just a little bit. Okay, this will pop out quite a bit more when we do the final color grade, and then the sharpening effect that I'm going to teach you to do at the very end. So that's that. Let's add another effect on here. We're going to add another image. We're going to go to, this is a folder of lens flare elements. This is part of my OpenGL flares. This is GL Flares 2. You can find that again on Blend Swap. Just do a search for that. And in the folder connected with that file, you can find these assets. I'm going to take this one here, Lens Grit Distorted, and we're going to set it frame 1 to frame 250 all the way to the end. We'll add the image. And then what I'm going to do is move it up one channel here. I'm going to add underneath it a color, and it's a black color by default. And then I'm going to add a mask to this. Now there's a few ways to do a mask. You can create a mask using a wipe, or you can draw a mask. Why don't we draw it? So we'll draw a mask in here. Let's open up, or we'll change this curves window to our UV image editor. And you can see I actually have a mask in here already. What I'll do is I'll show you very quickly how we draw this mask. So I'll just select all of that. We'll get rid of it. So you want to make a new image just so you can see your mask a little bit easier. And I set the image to 1920 by 1080. This is just for a reference. Or you could open up a frame if you wanted to. That's the proper ratio. We're going to mask off the corner over here because we only want to see a little bit of this lens flare. This is very similar to a project that Andrew Kramer did on his Video Copilot website. So we're doing a lot of the same principles here for this composite as what you see in there. What we do is we hit Control. We go to the mask settings, and if you hit Control, hold down Control and then click, you can kind of draw out a mask, and then what it does is it automatically will close off the endpoint. You don't have to close that off, it just fills it in automatically. You can see that I have it set right now, the view settings, to alpha channel overlay. If you just want to see the line, you can do that. Now to get a feather, you can hit Alt S will scale the feather. So if we hit that, let me hit escape for a second. First we need to select, we'll circle select the parts that we want to feather. So we'll select those vertices, and then we'll hit Alt S, and it will allow us to scale out the feather. So move this out quite a bit, go out to there, and let me get this back onto my screen here. So here's our mask that we're going to use. I can take the whole thing. We'll box select everything and move it. Hit G to move it up into the corner, about like that. And we can go out of this. This mask is called. Let's see what it's called. I think it's just called mask. You can name it there if you want to. We'll go back to our graph editor. Down here on my distorted lens grit distorted image, we're going to go down to the bottom and add a modifier. I'm going to add a mask to it, and then in the mask setting I'm going to click on mask, and then I'm going to select our mask that we made. So you can see that it is now masking out that one part. Now what we want to do is we're going to set this to, in fact, I wonder if I hit add. That doesn't work. So yeah, see, this is why we have to add the color underneath. Add blend mode will bring back everything, not just the mask part. So what we want to do is we're going to set it to alpha over. And what it does is it uses that alpha mask to drop it onto the black image below. So now we can take both of these together. And actually, I'm gonna duplicate this color because we're gonna need it again in a second. We'll close that, mute it for a second. We'll select the lens grit and then the color underneath it, and we will make a meta strip out of that. Then I'm gonna set the meta strip to add. So now it's adding on top of our scene there. Okay. We can then take this image and change our opacity. I like to take it down to 0. And then just go up incrementally 0.1 and then scrub through and see if it's barely noticeable. You don't really want to use an effect like this I've learned from experience. I used to make these lens grit elements very, very prominent in my videos, and it kind of gets in the way. So probably 0.3 is plenty enough. So barely noticeable in there. Of course, when we do our final color grade, it'll stick out even more. So we'll leave that on just like that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add, in fact, I don't need this right now. I'll get rid of that. We're going to add a color grade to this. So we'll go back to the beginning. I'll add an adjustment layer. So we'll go up to Effect Strip, add an adjustment layer. We'll slide this over. And we want this adjustment layer to deal with our color grade for the whole scene. So it's now going to grade not only our grit, but also our filter underneath with our lens grit and our film grain, and then also the vignette. In fact, I might even have a couple of these things a little bit out of order. Usually you want to have the grit on top of everything else. So I'm just going to move my lens grit down here, rather the film grain you want to have. You want your grain to be the very last thing so that it's affecting everything, including that lens grit. It probably doesn't change it too much, but just to be consistent, we'll do that. So I've got my original image, I've got the vignette, I've got the lens grit, then I've got my grain effect, and then I have an adjustment layer for my final color curve. Now we're going to add a color grade to this by using a curves modifier. So we'll add a curves. Now there's lots of ways to do this. I'm a big fan of this curves method. I saw, to name him again, Andrew Kramer do this a number of years ago, and it makes a lot of sense to me. Curves are very, very powerful. You can use a curve to do lots of different things. In fact, we're going to use this in a little bit here to accomplish a sharpening effect at the very end. But we're going to just add a curves. You could also use, if you wanted, you can use a color balance modifier to do that. A lot of people do that in their color grade. The premise works this way. We have red, green, and blue channels. Now, to do a typical blues versus oranges, blues on the low and oranges on the upper end kind of grade, what you do is you go to the red channel, and then we're going to take the darks in the red channel, and we're going to take some of those out. So if I move this curve in a little bit, I'm removing red from the blacks, from the darks down here. Okay. Then I'm going to go to the highlights. We'll go to the blues, and in the highlights in the blue, I'm going to bring that down just a little bit. So we're left with kind of a reddish tint on the very upper edge near the whites, if you follow what's going on here. And the greens we're just going to leave alone. You can change the greens if you want to remove some. If you want your highlights to be a little bit more red or the darks to be a little bit more pure blue rather than a tealy kind of color, you can use the green curves to change that. But very basically, we just want blues in the darks, kind of orangey reds in the lights. And now we're going to set our contrast a little bit here. One thing we're going to do is we're going to crush down the darks just a tiny bit. And then we're going to take the upper side of this and we're going to add a curve to brighten it up. So we have a little bit more of a contrast going on here. So we'll brighten up our scene just a little bit. So we'll take that, and just to see what this looks like without, that's without it, this is with it. So we get just a little bit kind of a twilighty evening look to it with a little bit of a orange hue. In fact, I might take a little bit more of that out. Might even take the red and move them up a little bit on the upper end. Get a little bit more of a red sunsetty kind of orange color to it. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to add a sharpen effect to this. You can add a sharpening effect to kind of make your final output pop just a little bit more. Now Blender's got a problem. It doesn't really have a sharpening effect that's any good. Now I haven't spent a lot of time in the compositor in a while, so I don't know if a sharpen node has been added in there, but I do know that from the video sequence editor, at least last I checked, this is 2.76, so we're actually a version behind here. But last I checked, there is no sharpen effect. That's not been added. I think it used to exist in there years and years ago, but it's not in there now. So we're going to have to use a method that gets us a sharpen effect, kind of the long and tricky way around. Now before I do that, I want to show you a very quick trick here. If you want to, you can actually go outside of the video sequence editor and outside of Blender entirely and use something called the GIMP Animation Package. It's a package that's an additive to a GIMP a photo editor, image editor, that allows you to actually work with an image sequence, a video. You can do some very powerful things with the GIMP Animation Package. In fact, when I first got into rotoscope work, even before Blender was able to do any kind of roto work with masks, back when you had to use splines and curves and things like that from the viewport, I would use GIMP to do roto work, and you can paint frame by frame by frame in an image sequence. So I just want to show you how to do that real quick, kind of seamlessly. What you would do is you would render out an image sequence, so not a video but an image sequence. So I'm going to do that real quick, just a few frames here. We'll set it to PNG. I'm going to go to the desktop. I'm going to make a new folder here. We'll call it frames, and then inside of there we'll call the output frame. And I'll put a little underline there at the end. And then we'll hit accept. And we'll render out just a few frames here. So I'll hit animation. We'll render out some frames to that area. So this renders quite quickly from the video sequence editor, especially if you have a more powerful system. We'll render out just a little over 20 frames, and I'll just hit the stop there. So I've got 26 frames of animation. Now what I can do is I can seamlessly go to GIMP and to the animation package right from here. If I load into the user preferences, my preferred photo editor, external editor as GIMP, I can then use my menu controls to get there. So what I'll do is I'll open up the first frame of our image. So I'll go to frame 1, open that up down here in my UV editor output. Then I'm going to go to image and I'm going to click on edit externally. And oh, because this is packed, it says unpack before editing. Let me do something real quick here. This is set to be packed. Let's try that one more time. We'll open this up. That's fine. Go to, excuse me for a second. Here we go. And we'll go to image and we'll click edit externally. And now GIMP will open up. And it gives me that first frame. Now, if you've loaded the GIMP Animation Package, you will have this little menu here called Video. Now GIMP can actually import frames from video. If you click on that and come down to split video into frames, you can extract a video range using a couple of different tools there, and it will generate these frames. Now, I found that when using GIMP Animation Package alone, it's best if you import your frames as actual GIMP project files. So not as PNGs, but actually as, if we click Save As here, you can see it's an XCF. That's a GIMP file format. I think some other programs also use that. But what it does is it's a multi-layer project. So you can have multiple layers with each individual frame. And that's very useful when using GIMP as a compositing tool for video. Maybe I'll do a tutorial on this sometime in the future. We can investigate this a little bit for those of you that are interested. But if you use that file format, it will retain all of your layers frame by frame for the video. We're not going to do that now. We're just going to apply one basic effect. So what I can do from here is I can go to video and I can go down to the, it's actually called the, let me find it here, VCR. Might not be able to see it here. Video. VCR Navigator, and we just hit Save As Is. We'll leave that alone. It'll open up this little tool that now has all of my frames in it, and they play back. You can actually play this image sequence back. Now, it doesn't play very fast. It's very, very slow in the playback and very low resolution in terms of the preview. If you're using the native file format, this plays back very quickly and it updates very fast, so another reason to use that. But I can work frame by frame now, and not only can I do that, but I can actually apply effects, kind of batch processing to all of the frames. So let's try something here. We're going to go up to the video, and I'm going to click on this Frames Modify button here. This doesn't look like a button, but it is a button up here. It says Function. So you see it doesn't look like a button, but it is. It says Set Layers Visible, so it's telling it what to do for each one of the 25 frames that's in here. I'm going to click on Function, and we're going to apply a Apply Filter on Layers button. So I'll do that. We'll leave everything else as default from frame 1 to frame 25. I click OK. And then it gives me the list of all of my filters. These are all of the filters that are available in GIMP. And I'm going to find plugin Sharpen right here. So if I click on that one, and I'll just click on Apply Constant, it will open up the Sharpen dialog. So what I can do is I can set this, we'll set it to some kind of unrealistic amount. We'll set it up to maybe a 70. And you can see if I click Preview, you can see what that looks like. It's considerably sharper than it was before. So if I click on that now, what I'm going to do is if I hit OK, it will now apply this. If I hit Continue, it'll apply it to every layer. So as it's moving through this, it will update every single image within that folder with this effect. So we'll just kind of let it run through its paces here real quick while I kind of talk and chat with you. It runs fairly quickly. It's not super fast, but it's certainly every bit as fast, I think, as it would be to apply the effect within the video sequence editor or the compositor. So there's all 26 frames or 25 frames there. And if we go to the VCR Navigator and go to the next frame, you can see that all of these frames then have that sharpen effect, and it has to update each one. So we're done with that. I'll just hit close on that. We'll close out of GIMP completely. Now if I come back to my video sequence editor and I import that video, so this is before, and I'll add a image, and I'll go to the desktop where I have my frames, and I'll hit A for all. We'll add all of these images. So this is the output from GIMP. You can see that it's been sharpened up considerably from what it was before. So this is now with the effect applied to it. So this is what it looks like now. That's what it looked like before. So this is adding that sharpening effect seamlessly right from the Blender menu options. You can jump to GIMP and do that. So that's one way to do this, and to apply any other GIMP effect that you want to. We're going to do a different thing though. We're going to actually try to make a sharpen effect right inside of the video sequence editor. So let me explain how we can do this. There's something called a high-pass filter that people have been using for years within Photoshop, and I think you can do similar things from the compositor in Blender and also in GIMP. But it's a filter that we use to find the highlights and the dark edges where colors change. So it's a way to differentiate the spaces where colors are changing and generate contrast only in those spaces. So let's see if we can invent a way to do this. This is kind of a modified short tutorial based on a principle that I saw someone do inside of the Blender compositor before. I can't remember who it was. It was either a Blender Toots channel or it was a Blender Cookie tutorial. I can't remember where I saw this. I saw it a while ago. But this is a modified version of that. What we're going to do is we're going to add another adjustment layer above this, and we're going to add another adjustment layer above that. Okay, so one of these is going to be kind of a throwaway. On the top adjustment layer, we're going to make this a inversion of the color of the original image. So the way that we do that is we can add a curves adjustment. Again, curves are very powerful, and on the full color curve, we're going to grab the lows and we're going to switch them for the highs. So we'll take the dark end and bring it all the way up to white, and we'll bring the white end and bring it all the way back down to dark. So this is what we end up with. It's an exact inversion of the image below it. So this is before, this is after. Now what we want to do is we're going to add a blur to this. We need to find a way to differentiate the places where colors change. Right now, if I take this image and if I set the adjustment layer with the inversion as cross to an opacity of 0.5, so it's half transparent, it makes everything a total neutral gray. This is a precise exact 0.5 gray. That's because the inverted colors on top, when mixed with the original colors on the bottom, are mixed together because they're absolute opposites. You end up with neutral gray. Okay, so let's take this back up to 1 again. I'm going to add to this are you with? Hopefully you're with me so far. This is a kind of a tricky thing to think about. I'm going to go to the effect strip and we're going to add a Gaussian blur. And on this Gaussian blur, we're at 1080p, so we're going to set this to 10 pixels on X and Y. So not a very big blur, but just enough to see kind of a fuzzy edge here. We're going to take the adjustment layer that it's affecting below, and we're going to mute it. And then I'm going to set the Gaussian blur layer to 0.5. Now remember what happened last time we did this. Because the image is exactly the same as the image below, we got neutral gray. This image isn't exactly the same. It's a little different, okay? It's got a blurred effect to it. So it's not going to line up perfectly with the image below. Now, if I then change this to a cross, you'll see what happens. If we zoom in, you can see what I'm getting is the places where colors change, I can see an edge of highlight, and then I see an edge of darkness. So where the darker color is at, where the colors change, you see a darker kind of edge, and where the color was lighter, you see this 10 pixel a gradient of a lighter image. Okay, all within this kind of neutral grayscale. There's a little bit of color in there. Survives because it's a blurred image on top of it. Now if you want this to be super authentic, you could add an adjustment layer above this, or you can take the first adjustment layer and set it to 0 saturation. That will make it absolutely grayscale. I don't see the need to do that. In fact, I think it gives some interesting results if all the saturation is in there. So I'll just set that back up to 1 again. But if you want to be a little bit more pure about this, you can turn that saturation down to 0. This is the image we end up with, and we're going to use this now to sharpen our image underneath. We're going to kind of use this as an overlay. Now, we have a problem. We cannot merely overlay this, causing the neutral gray to be transparent. There are blend mode settings in most compositors that allow you to do that, but we're a little limited with our blend modes here. We have overdrop, which is just an overlay, multiply, which won't work, gamma cross won't do anything, alpha under doesn't do what we want, alpha over won't work because there's no alpha channel, subtraction doesn't really work in and of itself, and the addition won't work because there's neutral gray in there, it's not black. What we need to do is we need to isolate two different versions of this, one that has just the highlights and one that has just the shadowy edges. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take these 1, 2, 3 layers that are all part of this effect, and we're going to make this into a meta strip. So now we've put them together, and they are a layer all of themselves. So this is one effect. Okay, now it takes me a while to explain this. Once you learn to do it, you can do it very quickly and efficiently. Now what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate it, but we're going to use a trick to duplicate it. Rather than duplicate this layer so that we're repeating the Gaussian blur twice and all of the effects within it, we're going to use an effect strip. We're going to use the transform effect, but we're not going to use it for its transform properties. We're not going to use any of these. We're just going to use it because it duplicates the layer. Okay, so if I take this original one, I can mute it now, and I have my transform, and then I can duplicate that transform so I have two copies of that same layer, if you follow what's going on here. Now you have to use something like transform, and you can't use an adjustment layer because an adjustment layer applies to everything below it, whereas a transform effect applies only to the layer that it originates from. Okay, so we have these two things here. We're going to mute the top one. The bottom one, we want to isolate the dark parts. We want to turn the dark edges to a white, and we're going to use it as a mask. And we're going to turn everything else black. So what we want to do on this first one is we're going to add a curves adjustment again. And on this curves adjustment, we're going to invert it, just like we did before. And we're going to take the lights, and we're going to take the dark end, which is now on the right, and we're going to move this on the Y or on the X axis to 0.5. And what it's going to do is it's going to take all of the neutral gray and it's going to make that now the black value. So we're then left with these highlights here. Now the highlights represent all of the shadowy edges. Okay, this is all the places where there's a darkness. Okay. And then we're going to go to the next transform layer, and we'll turn it back on. This we're going to isolate the highlights. So we're going to add another curve, but we're not going to invert this one. Instead, we're just going to take the dark side of the regular curve, and we're going to set this to 0.5. That'll take the neutral gray and turn it black, and it leaves the highlights now as the lighter color. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to apply both of these layers to our image below. The first one here we're going to apply as a mask, a subtract mask. So it's going to take away all of the darker values. You see with it off, and there it's on, off, on. So it's going to take away all of the dark areas from the image and make them even darker. And then we're going to apply an add effect to the highlights. And you can see there it's off and on. And it will take the highlights and it will then boost them through an add mode. So this is what we get with both of them put together. Now just to take a look back, this is what it looked like from GIMP. So we'll load in the GIMP strip here. You can see this is the output from GIMP. And if we compare it, turn it off compared to what we just did, you see that our Blender version of this effect is a little bit more stark than the GIMP one. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the values of our masks here. So we're just going to set them to 0.5. So they're not quite as powerful. So we'll half them. And the reason why we have to do this, don't forget that we had to compress our mask with our curves adjustment. So if we back it off to 0.5, it comes out about right. So this is with it out, without. Here you see without everything, and we turn them on. There's the darks, here's the lights. This is what it looks like with. And you can see that it looks quite a bit more contrasted now. Now the whole image is not in higher contrast, it's just sharpened. We've sharpened the edges where all of the colors meet. So what you can do is you can take this meta strip right here, you can actually put this together as an effect and save it in a file, and then you can use it later on automatically. Because it has an adjustment layer on the very bottom of it, it will automatically apply to any footage that you apply below it. So then you just merely have to add the transform layers above, the one for the darks, the one for the lights, and then you can use this in the future. So you don't have to recreate this every time. You can just create it one time and then save it. So that's how we do it. We can apply this effect here to our footage below and get this this effect that gives us a bit of a sharpening to our image when we otherwise don't have it in access to us in the video sequence editor. And it's really not a bad output. It's pretty close to what we get from GIMP, or if you were to use a sharpening tool inside of something else. So let's try a couple more things. We're going to add the anamorphic crop. So we'll go grab that image and we'll set the overlay. 250 frames here. And we'll set the blend mode to alpha over. So now we have our cropped image, and the one nice thing about this is that you can change parts in there that are below everything else. This is somewhat of a procedural sequence here. So if I want to change like this lens grit and move it down a little bit, what I can do is I'll take my crop and I'll lower the opacity on my crop so I can see through it a little bit. And then we'll come down to this meta strip where I have my lens grip overlay, and we'll enable the image offset, and we can move it on the Y value down until it sticks out a little bit further below. We can see a little bit more of that grit showing up, a better portion of the frame there. And then we come up to the top, we set our opacity back up for the crop, and there we have our final output. So from here we can render this. You can see what it looks like if we scrub through it. I'll render one frame, and it renders relatively quickly. Everything all put together. And this is what our final output looks like. So if we play this back, this is what it looks like. It's a little bit different. This was pre-rendered. But you can see that we have that sharpening effect and the color grade, and then of course those assets, those simple quick assets that we added in there. So very quickly I want to show you an example of how you can create this effect, this sharpening effect, and kind of save it aside in a project file and then use it instantly anytime that you want to. Just kind of have it pre-made together. Which, by the way, anybody out there who likes to write code for new add-ons, you might be able to construct this together and put this into a menu as an add-on, something that might be available from the video sequence editor in the future if this is an acceptable method. So as an idea for someone out there, if we can kind of pre-configure this to work in the future. If not, you can put this together and save it aside. So what I have here is a meta strip, and I'm just going to call it Sharpen. And this is the whole effect already constructed together. So you see this footage I have from a previous tutorial in here. As I scrub through, we'll just move the cursor back. And again, it's kind of a slower effect because there's a number of things going on. There's a gaussian blur happening in there, a few different things happening. If I take this meta strip here, the sharpen effect, and I turn it off, you'll see here's the original and here's the sharpened version. So original and sharpen. You see how much it makes it pop there. We can then change the sharpening amount by just changing the opacity of the effect. If I set it down to 0.5, it'll be half of what the effect was. So there it's off, 0.5, all the way up. So we can change the amount just by changing the opacity. So let's look at what's going on inside of this. If I right button click to select and I hit tab, I can look inside of that meta strip. And you see on the bottom I have an adjustment layer. This bottom adjustment layer, this is set up a little bit different from the one that I just showed you in our project file a moment ago. But this bottom adjustment layer is the one that accepts the footage that is underneath, directly underneath this whole effect. Okay, so this is the transitional layer, the adjustment layer that takes in the footage. There's no different settings on it, it's just a regular adjustment layer. Then it goes to this meta strip right above it. Now let's look inside the meta strip. This is the actual effect. If I hit tab again, we can now see inside of that. So the bottom adjustment layer inside here accepts the adjustment layer just outside of this meta strip. Now this adjustment layer I have set at 0 saturation. So this is giving a very pure kind of reading of the footage. It's just a black and white grayscale. Now what this one is doing is it then goes to this secondary adjustment layer, which if I turn it on, this is the inverted version of this bottom one. Okay, so I'll turn that off again, turn that opacity off. Now this inverted version, remember it has a curves adjustment. I'll turn it on one more time just to remind you. See, there's an inverted curve. That then goes to the Gaussian blur layer, and this Gaussian blur layer is set at 10 pixels. Could be less than that if you want it to be a tighter effect, but that's set at 10 pixels. And the Gaussian blur layer is set at an opacity, a cross opacity of 0.5. So this Gaussian blur mixed with the original adjustment layer gives us this high pass filter kind of output where we have the highlights and then the shadows wherever the colors are changing. Okay, so that's that filter that we were looking at before. All right, so that's what's happening there. If I tab back into that meta strip, so that's the meta strip, then the meta strip is applied in these transform layers here. If we want to really be clean about it, we could set the name for the bottom one. Instead of calling it transform, we'll call it subtract, and then we'll call the let's try that again, subtract, and then we'll call the top one add. So the bottom layer, the subtract layer, is applying the negative, the low amount, and you can remember that we applied an invert curve, and then we set the highlights back to 0.5 to get black, just like we did earlier. And then the addition one is the opposite. It's not inverted, but it's the blacks are then moved up to 0.5 so that we have the highlights are the only ones standing out. And of course that one's applied via an add transfer mode, add blend mode, and the bottom one is a subtract. So we're masking these out. So you see how this all goes together. We have the adjustment layer accepting the footage in. That goes to the meta strip, which has another adjustment layer which takes away the saturation, and then there's another adjustment layer above that which has the invert and then the Gaussian blur, and then that Gaussian blur is applied via a cross at 0.5. That's condensed to this meta strip. Then the meta strip here is applied via these transform effects here, one for subtract, one for add, each with the curve on it as I explained. And then all of this with this adjustment layer on the bottom to accept the footage, if we tab back out, is applied via another meta strip, and we call that sharpen. And there's the effect. Okay, so you can have this set up and apply this effect at will from inside a pre-saved video sequence file. So there you have it. You can generate this effect ahead of time and then use it later on down the road. Again, it does render a little slowly, but you know, it is a sharpen effect. It's a way to get it and a way to add that kind of extra pop to your footage once you're done with your final color grade. Now, the neat thing is I can do anything underneath this. If I add to this an adjustment layer, we'll fill this out, and I will turn off my sharpen layer just so you can see what happens here. So here's my adjustment layer. Let's say that we'll take this saturation down to 0.8, and then I'll add a curves modifier down here. We'll, on the initial curves, we'll just put in a desaturate and also take away some of the contrast. Maybe we'll take the blacks and bump them up a little bit. So we have a starting point. And take this one down. And then on top of that, we'll add another curves adjustment. And for this curves adjustment, we'll add our color curves like we did before. We'll take the red channels down a little bit, and we'll take the blue down on the top a little bit. Maybe we'll add a little more red on the top. Crush the dark. Bring up the lights. So we give it a bit of this color grade from before. And then on top of that, we apply our sharpen, and you see we've got this whole effect applied. So that's with the sharpen, without, with, without. So there you have it, a sharpen effect that you can apply to your final composites. So that's how this works, and I hope that you found this useful. And I hope you find a way to incorporate this into your project. So I wish you the best of luck and happy blending.